My goal here is to color this chick. This is a horrible time for me to be doing a video, by the way, and I'm not going to have any time to edit. So I imagine this isn't going to totally go well, but I'm going to give it a try anyway. Okay, so the colors I've chosen for my chick are, let's see, so we do this. Pull out Y2, Y3, YR5, R9, and possibly YR4. Oh, and your blender. I can't find my Ohuhu blender. I'll have to use my Copic one. I keep losing the Ohuhu one. I have no idea why. Anyway, go ahead and start with Y2, Y3, and have YR5 nearby. Okay, so we're going to do a base coat. Actually, let's just do the wings first. Okay, so we're going to do a base coat of the lightest color, which is Y3. It's funny that this is the lightest color because it's pretty dark. Anyway, then we're going to take Y2. And we're just going to put a little line feathering out from the crease. Then you're going to take your YR5 and put the teeniest, tiniest amount of ink right next to that black line, just barely dabbing it. I'm just like barely touching the paper. There we go. Then we're going to go back to Y2 to blend that out, and we're just going to feather out a little bit, not too much, about halfway. Then we're going to go back to the Y3 and blend that out to the tip. And a little outside the lines. This is a good time to grab your blender and just push that back in. And then you let it dry, and if it's back, you do it again. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with this other little wing. Y3 over the whole thing. Then switching to Y2. Feather out just a little bit. Then grab your YR5. Put the teeniest, tiniest little amount where you want your darkest shadow. Then go back to your Y2 and go over that, pulling it out just a little bit. Then go back to your Y3 and blend out that line to the edge. And you can kind of go over all of it if you feel like it's not blending great, but you don't want to go over it too much, because if you go over darkest too much with your lightest, it'll start pulling it up. Okay, now we got to do the whole body. So we're gonna start with the Y3. Now I'm gonna do this with the block coloring the whole thing, and then doing that as my lightest, and then going back down to darkest. You could do this as you go, but I feel like if you're just starting, this is one method. Okay, so we want to block color all of this, but we don't want to hit his cheeks or his beak. So when you're doing this, you kind of start at one end and you start drawing a line. And your whole time you're doing this, you want to keep this line wet. So you kind of go from top to bottom. Once you get to an object, you can kind of circle around it. Keep going, but always go back up to the top. Don't let it go too far on either side without getting ink. When you come into an object, just outline it and then keep going. So you don't have to like race, but you just want to be aware of how long it's been since you've gone to the other end and go back and forth. Once you hit an object, go around it. And don't forget the bottom. There we go. Okay, now we want to take our midtone, our next darkest color. And I've decided that I want the shadow to be, like I'm going to have the light source be in the upper right hand corner. It really does not matter. You can put the shadows wherever you feel like you want to. There just needs to be some variation and for it to look a little bit more 3D. This is a cartoon character, so you don't have to go for total realism. I've just decided that I'm going to go ahead and put a shadow on the left side of his body towards the bottom. And yeah, that's about it. Okay, so I'm going to take my next darkest color. I'm going to map out where I want my shadow to be. And I'm just going to very, very lightly put a line. When you get about to where you want it, that looks good to me, you're going to feather it out just a little bit. Teeny tiny strokes. Teeny tiny. Okay. Then you're going to switch to your R5. YR5. I grabbed the wrong marker. Here we go. And you're going to put a teeny tiny, barely putting any ink, just right next to the black line. And this is the less ink you can get on this, the better. So when I get down to here, it's like barely touching. Then you're going to go back to your Y2. And first stroke you're going to do, just go over the edge of it. Just wet it. Because you want it to stay wet. Then you're going to pull that out. I have to turn this a little bit. Then you're going to pull that out a little farther. Now, if you're still getting a line right here that you don't like, just kind of dab over it and see if it dissipates or if it, you know. It's almost, sometimes it feels like it melts. And because it's the deepest shadow, it can actually have a little bit of a line. That's fine. Okay, then I'm going to go back to the lightest color, Y3. And I'm going to go over the whole thing, pulling this stuff out and covering pretty much everything again. But first, I just realized, you got to kind of go over that line, make sure it's going to dissipate a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point, but just get it wet. Then we're going to go over pretty much the whole thing. I try to avoid going right over the darkest one if I can. And then just go ahead and do the whole thing. If you've done really well with your feathering, you might not need to do this, but if there's any color variation, don't worry if it's just a little teeny bit because it dries. When it dries, those go away sometimes, but if you're pretty sure that you're going to need to go over the whole thing, this would be the time. So similar to before. Oh, I missed this spot. Okay. Now, let's go on to his beak and cheeks. Okay. Go ahead and grab your YR4 and your YR5. YR4, this is going to be orangish, so it's going to, the YR4 is going to be the lightest color. We're only going to do 2 with this. Okay, so just very lightly, just kind of go over the whole thing. So it's a really teeny area. Then you're going to take the YR5, and you're going to go over just a teeny, teeny, teeny bit at the top of his nose. Then go back to your R4, or YR4, and pull that out. And just go. You're just basically going over the whole thing. There we go. Okay, for the cheeks, It makes sense to do the same thing. You could do the exact same thing for that, but this one I'm totally not sure. So let's just experiment. First I'm going to try the R9 with a blender. This is a really bright pink, and what we want is a really soft pink, but that's the softest we have. So what I'm going to suggest is we take a blender. By the way, this is going to stain your blender, but it won't totally hurt it. And I'm just going to take some off, and then I'm just going to dab a little bit of color there in a circle. I'm not even going to try to get to the edge. There we go. There we go. Actually, that worked out pretty well. I'm not really gonna, it's such a small space, I'm not really gonna bother. If you really wanted to get fancy, you could add just a little, let's see, where did we put the light source? Over there. You could just put a little teeny bit extra on one side, but honestly, you're probably the only one who would notice something like that. Anyway, there we go. We now have a colored little chick. Now, if you make one of these that you like, and you'd like to make a card out of it, let me know, because what we will do is we'll die cut it, and I can show you how to put it on a card. All right, let me hold this up. Yeah, go back.